just to remind you, you are all on mute, so if you do have any questions, please send them in through our chat functionality that you have on the WebEx. You can just send those in and we'll look at those questions at the end of the demo. So as I've just mentioned, Yooz is a cloud solution. So I'm going to connect using a secure HTTPS connection up here. This is the name of my application. This could be quite simply the name of your company. I'm going to log in using a login and a secure password. And based on the roles that I've been given, based on the rights that I've been given, I'm going to have access to more or less functionalities in my application, have access to more or less documents, so that is purely based on the roles of each of the users. So here I am logged in. The first role that we're going to be looking at is a member of the AP team, so I have the role accountant. So here I'm logged in, and you can see I've got three main sections on my screen. On the left, my folders, which is a list of my company sites, my subsidiaries, my departments, so I can have those separate in Yooz, meaning I can have one chart of accounts for site 1, a different chart of accounts for company 2 and 3. I can also have different suppliers based on the company site. I can also have different users. So maybe if I'm an approver for site 1, I don't have access to site 2, but obviously general managers, upper management will have access to all of those sites. For each of those sites, I have the number of documents that I need to process. So here for company 1, I've got 4 documents. In the middle of my screen, this is my documents section. Now this is a more in-depth view of those 4 documents where I'm going to be able to see document type, supplier, document numbers, amounts, and so on. So it's a more in-depth view of those 4 documents. And it's also my to-do list. So these are the documents that I personally need to work on. Once I've worked on those documents, I'm going to be able to send them into a workflow into my in-progress box here, which I'm going to be able to see information the same as in the My Documents, so document type, supplier, amounts, document numbers, and so on. But I'm also going to be able to see the recipient. So I can see that I've got 2 documents with James and 1 document with Tom. So that's just giving me the possibility of tracing my documents from the beginning to the end of their processing in Yooz. At the bottom of my screen, several buttons. Purchase requisition here, which is that possibility of creating a PO in Yooz, sending it into a workflow, sending that order to my supplier. I'll also be able to do my goods receipting. And as I've said, once the invoice has been imported, I'll be able to do that automatic match between the invoice and the order. Import, we'll go into that in just a minute. Import is how did these documents get onto the system? So different ways of importing those documents. Export here is export back to my finance system. So I can do this manually. So click on this export button. Yooz is going to generate a file with all the coding of the invoices that has been done in Yooz. So generate a file manually that I can take and import into my finance system. I can also automate. So I could tell Yooz every night or every hour or for every time a document has been processed, I want to export it back to my finance system. Yooz is going to generate the file that can be dropped onto your system or straight onto your finance system. Settings is where I'm going to go to create new users, to create new workflows. Obviously, not everyone has access to the settings. That's a specific role. My profile is where I'm going to go to change my password. I can also delegate my access. So I'm going on holiday for a couple of weeks. Obviously, the documents can't wait for me to be back to be processed. I'm going to delegate my access to a specific person during that specific time frame so that the documents don't run late or everything is paid on time and so on. Support to contact our support team via telephone, email and chat. We also have some user guides in there. Search is where I'm going to go to search for documents using different criteria. So I can search using document type, due date, supplier, amounts, and so on. I can run reports from this screen here. I can generate them back to Excel if I need to work on them outside of Yooz. If there's a report that I run on a regular basis, I can save my reports to have them accessible in one click here or directly on my landing page. The other search functionality that we have is the keyword search at the top of my screen here, which is just going to enable me to search for documents based on any word, any number, any code that's in that document. So for example, I need to find all my documents for my Dell computers because I have some issues with one of them. I can't remember the supplier, I can't remember when I purchased them. All I have to do is fill in the word Dell, and Yooz is going to find me all the documents that contain that word or that number or that code. So that was the landing page. I am going to go straight into the import functionality now. So how did these documents get onto the system? So we have several possibilities. Firstly, we have this import button. So this is what we call the manual import. So I have received my invoices by post, so paper documents. I've scanned them using my normal Office scanner. They've saved on my computer, on my hard drive, and I'm going to quite simply browse and search for those files. I can select a company if I have access to multiple companies, as well as the document type, invoice, credit note, order, other document, and so on. And then I'm going to click Add and Import, and the documents are going to land in the My Documents section of the relevant user. Other possibilities for importing the documents, we have a functionality called email capture. Now, email capture is probably used by 85–90% of our customers today. It is a really cool feature because basically it enables you to create a link between Yooz and a dedicated email address. So, for example, supplier invoices at mycompany.com. Your suppliers can send their invoices to that email address. You can transfer internally to that email address. If you have a scanner that does scan to email, you can scan and send straight to that email address, and Yooz is going to automatically go and pick those invoices up and drop them in Yooz ready for processing. Other possibilities, we've got a mobile app, so you can download the app on your phone, which means you can take a photo of the invoice, upload it onto the system. So that's really useful if you have a lot of receipts. Approvers are also going to be able to approve through the mobile app and also search for documents through that mobile app as well. So that is also pretty useful if you have a lot of users who aren't always in the office, don't always have access to a computer. They can just take out their phone, search for those documents, approve them, or whatever. Other possibilities, we have a supplier portal where suppliers can come and drop their invoices. It will enable them, if you want them to be able to see a status of their invoices so they can see if it's ready to be paid, if it's been approved, if it's been rejected, and so on. And the last possibility for importing the documents is our SFTP module, where we can designate a folder on your system that can be accessible to multiple users, where they can just come and drop their documents, and Yooz is going to go and pick those up automatically. So there are a lot of ways of importing the documents onto the system, and it can evolve. So you could start with the manual import, and in a few months go on to just the email capture functionality. That is completely up to you. We also have a duplicate document detection, which is based on different criteria, supplier name, document number, amount, and document date. And you can set those up to really how you want to reflect your internal rules. So maybe for one of our customers, a duplicate is an invoice from the same supplier with the same number. but maybe for another one of our customers, it's the same supplier, same amount, and same invoice number. So up to you. So we do have duplicate document detection on the system, which means you won't be able to process the same invoice twice. So once the documents are on the system, you will see them in the My Documents section of the relevant user. So that will be based on the workflows you've set up, so they can go to one specific person. As I mentioned before, the role that we're looking at now is the accountant role, so I am a member of the AP team. Now, all the data that you're going to see on my system today, supplier names, nominal codes, VAT codes, cost centers, and so on, all that information is information that we will pull out from your finance system and that will be in Yooz. So what we have in Yooz will match what we have on your finance system, which means that we can create that link between the two systems to import all the data automatically. Now, for this invoice, you can see on the right that we have the image of the invoice. I can zoom in, zoom out, go from one page to the other if I had multiple pages. On the left, the information that Yooz has picked up automatically. I'll get back to that in a minute. And at the bottom, we have our coding. I'll get back to that in just a minute as well. So this has also been automatically suggested. So coming back to the image of the invoice, you can see that when I place my mouse on the words, on the numbers, on the amounts, you can see that Yooz has read absolutely everything on my invoice. Now that is what we call full text recognition, and that is associated with two benefits in Yooz. Firstly, with Yooz, we don't need to do any mapping of the invoices. So we don't need to say, for Farnham House Hotel, my invoice number is always going to be here, and my amounts are always going to be at the bottom in the middle. That I don't need to do because Yooz is going to read the whole invoice and is going to search for keywords. So Yooz knows that this is the invoice number quite simply because it says document number here. That this is the VAT amount quite simply because it says tax here. So tomorrow, if Farnham House decide to completely change the format, the layout of their invoice, that makes absolutely no difference to Yooz whatsoever. Yooz will still be able to find all that information automatically. The second benefit is the one I told you about at the beginning of the demo, which is the keyword search. So I could search for this invoice using any word, any number, any code on the document itself. So maybe I've got a booking number, but I can't remember who the hotel was or who was going to stay at that hotel. All I would have to do is fill in the booking number up here, and Yooz will find all the documents that contain that booking number. So those are the two main benefits of the full text recognition there. On the left, this is the information that Yooz has picked up automatically. Supplier name, dates, invoice numbers, amounts, and you can see when I come and click on that information, Yooz just comes and points to where that information was found. I can leave a comment in my comment box here for the next user on the workflow. And if I do want to leave a comment that's something that's on the actual image of the invoice, instead of manually typing on my keyboard, all I would have to do is click on the comment box on the left and just highlight what I want on my invoice. And that is available for every single field that you can see there. We can add custom fields. Maybe there's a certain field that you need your users to fill in that's company specific to you, then we can create custom fields as well. At the bottom of my screen here, we have the coding. Now this has been automatically suggested, so we are taking out all that manual entry of your invoices. Now this has been automatically suggested with my nominal code, VAT code, cost centers and so on, because the first time that I imported a Farnham House invoice into Yooz, my coding down here was blank. I came and I filled in my nominal, VAT code, project code and so on. Yooz is going to memorize this so that the next time that I import a Farnham House invoice, this is automatically suggested to me. So I don't have to do any manual entry whatsoever on this invoice. I can just approve it, send back the data to my finance system, and the document can go to an approver for approval, for example. I can obviously code to multiple accounts, so I'm just going to do an example here for you. I'm going to code to something else, technical installations, for example, here. Instead of having 5750 on my first account, I'm going to put 3216. Yooz is going to put the remaining amount, the remaining balance, on my second line here. Now I'm just going to change something. I'm going to remove the 20% VAT and I'm going to put 10%. And you're going to see that Yooz is going to recalculate the tax amount and the total amount. And you can now see that I've got two balances that have appeared here in red. Now that's quite simply because Yooz has read this information up here off my invoice, has made some checks, so just to make sure that net plus VAT equals gross amount and so on, and is going to compare what's been read off the invoice to what's been filled in or what's being filled in my coding here. If the two don't match, I'm going to have a balance that is going to appear here in red, and I'm not going to be able to save my invoice. So that's preventing me from making any mistakes on my coding. So I'm just going to remove this second line. So 3216, that's wrong, I need to put my 5750. Once again, instead of manually typing on my keyboard, I'm just going to click on the amount box there, on the actual image of the invoice to input that data, and you can see my balances have disappeared off there. So it's as simple as that. I don't need to do any coding on this invoice. All the data is going to be sent back into my finance system. I've got several buttons that you can see on the top of my screen here. History, which gives me the complete history of the document. How did the document get onto the system? Who's worked on the document? At what time? At what date? What did they do? So I have the complete audit trail, complete traceability of the document on the system. Attach. I could attach, so digitally staple any type of document to my invoice. Maybe I want to attach a quote, a contract, a delivery slip. I can do that through the attach button there. A little printer to print off my invoice, and a little envelope there to send an email straight from Yooz. So maybe I need to contact my supplier because there's an issue with this invoice. Instead of going into my email account, I can send that email straight from Yooz, and attached is, of course, the image of the invoice. If I'd attached any other documents, I'd be able to include them as well. At the bottom of my screen, several buttons. Pending, I've started working on my invoice, but I've got to go and do something else. I'm going to save and come back to it later. Forward, maybe I'm not quite sure. I'm going to forward this to someone else in my organization. Reject. Now, if I reject this, maybe there's an issue with my invoice, I can put the document in dispute with a reason. So you can create your own specific company-specific reasons for the dispute here. Leave a note. The document is going to stay in my documents with an alert that says in dispute. So the document has stopped at this step. And the document is going to stay in my documents until I come, remove that dispute, and carry on processing that document. Update to change the type of document. Not everyone has access to this button. No, maybe I've uploaded a batch of invoices and I hadn't noticed, but there was a credit note in there. I can change the type of document. Delete. Maybe, once again, I've imported a batch of documents, but there are some pages that shouldn't be in use. I can delete those. Once again, this is user specific. This is a specific role. Not everyone has access to that delete button for security reasons, of course. And I also have the submit button, which is going to enable me to save the document and send it to the next person on the workflow. Now, workflows can be based on suppliers. So maybe for Farnham House Hotel, they always need to be approved by James, or amounts or amounts. Anything under £100 needs one approver, and that is James. Anything above £10,000 needs 3 approvers. Anything above £10,000 for a specific supplier needs 4 approvers, and so on. We can also base workflows on cost centers, nominal codes, dimensions, and so on. So the workflows on the system can really be as simple or as complex as you want them to be. So I'm just going to confirm this, come back to my main screen, and you can now see that that Farnham House invoice is now with James with a status to approve step 1. Alongside that document being sent to James for approval, we can now, at this stage, send your data back to your finance system. So send all the coding back to your finance system. Depending on the finance system, we can also attach the image of the invoice. So next to your coding, you will have the image of your invoice. So send all that information back to your finance system to remove all that manual entry. James has that document. He needs to approve that document. We have sent out a reminder, a notification, sorry, not a reminder, a notification to tell James that he has a document that he needs to process. In that email, he has a link that will take him straight to that document to process. So we sent that to James, so we've notified him. We can also send out reminders. So if after a certain number of days, James hasn't processed that document, then we can remind him that he has a document to process. And we can also escalate to a manager. So if after a certain number of days, James still hasn't processed that document, then we can escalate to a manager who can take control of that document, forward it to someone else, or process it themselves. Now I am just going to sign out, and we are going to log back in as James, the approver. So I'm logging in now. James will have the Farnham House invoice in his My Documents section because he is the relevant user. He is owner of that document at the moment, and he needs to work on that document. So I'm just going to open that invoice again. And you can see on the right, we still have the image of the invoice. On the left, we have the information that has been approved by the AP team with the accounting and cost center allocation, the history of the document, the attach button. But here, as an approver, James can approve, he can reject. Now, if he rejects, he can put the document in dispute, but he can also send the document back to a previous step. Because James, as an approver, can't make any changes to what was approved by the AP team. So he can see all the details, but he can't make any changes. So if maybe he's seen something that's not normal, he can send the document back to the previous step and say, wrong cost center, or I haven't received the goods, or something like that, and we can send that document back to a previous step. We still have the pending and the forward button, and of course approve. James is quite happy with this invoice. I'm going to be able to send it to a third step in Yooz. So we've got 3 main steps. In each of those steps, we can have 9 different steps in those main steps. So the first step is the coding, so what we call posting, where the users who have the accountant role are going to intervene on those documents. So we can have up to 9 accountants working on an invoice one after the other. The next main step is the approval step, where we can have up to 9 approvers working one after the other on that document. And we have a third main step, which is the approval for payment. So we're going to send the document to a user who has the treasurer or paying agent role. So that's Tom here. So I am just going to sign out, log back in as Tom, who has the treasurer paying agent role. Now what we're going to be doing here is Yooz is not going to automatically generate payments, but we have several possibilities. Firstly, maybe Tom is going to do a search for all the documents that have a due date this week. The Farnham House invoice appeared there. He is going to leave a comment saying payment made with details here. He's going to submit it, and alongside Yooz, he's going to go and he's going to generate his payments from another system. So there's no link between Yooz and another system. We're going to submit this. The document is archived in Yooz, and I can search for it later on down the line. Second possibility, Tom has searched for all the invoices that have a due date this week. Farnham House popped up. He can submit this, and we're going to be able to generate a BAX or a SAPA format that you can upload into your banking software to be able to generate those payments. So once you submit, we generate a file, an XML file for your bank to generate those payments. Third possibility, Farnham House invoice here. I'm going to submit this. So I'm going to save this, I'm okay to pay this, and I'm going to send the data back to my finance system if I generate payments on my finance system, or back to my payment system, so we can interface with payment systems to generate those payments as well. So 3 possibilities there. I'm just going to submit this. And automatically, I don't know if you've noticed, but we move on to the next document on the workflow. That document, the Farnham House invoice, has now disappeared off my main screen. I'm just going to log back in as the initial user who has the accountant role. And you will see that that Farnham House invoice has disappeared off my main screen. It's no longer in my Documents section, no longer in my In Progress box. So the document has disappeared, is archived in Yooz. I can search for it using my search functionality down here, and the document is going to be stored in Yooz for a minimum of 6 years. So if I search the Farnham House, which has a status completed, that's been processed in Yooz, we've sent the data back to your finance system, so we've removed all that manual entry, everything is in your finance system. Now if we create a link between your finance system or a payment system to generate payments, once those payments have been made, we can send back information into Yooz so that instead of having a completed status, we have a paid status and the payment information as well. Just coming back to my main page here, just wanted to show you something really quick, just the process button, which is where we create the workflows on the system. So entry, approval, and payment. And as I said, we can have 9 accountants, one after the other, 9 approvers, and so on. And just to show you how quickly and simple it is to create a workflow, I'm going to just click here. And I'm going to say that this workflow is for company site 2. It is for the supplier, let's say Belgacom there, and we can say that amounts, if the invoice is greater than £5,000, then the document needs to be approved by Serena. So it's as simple as that to create your workflows. I think there are a few questions coming in on the chat function there. So that was the complete invoice processing cycle. We don't have time to go into the PO function, but if you would like to see that, don't hesitate to get back to us and we can schedule maybe a one-to-one demo to show you that functionality. I can see some questions coming in on the chat. So first question is, are you interfaced with Sage? So I didn't mention it, but we have more than 200 connectors to different finance systems today. So obviously the main ones on the market, Sage, Sage 50, Sage 200, NetSuite, Navision, Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, and so on. So yes, we are interfaced with Sage 50. We have a number of customers working on that system. Another question, if I can just get that one back up on my screen. Do we have to export when the invoice has been coded, or can we wait till it's been completely processed? Yeah, so you can export back to your finance system at any step on the system. So it can be after the coding, it can be after the approval, or it can be after the approval for payment. So we can send the data back to your finance system at any time in the processing there. I can see someone just typing in a question there. Let me just see if we had any other questions. Can Yooz read multiple languages? Yes, we can. So I showed you an invoice in English, but we can read Spanish, French, German, Polish, Italian. So basically any European language can be read by Yooz. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I can't see any other questions coming in on the chat functionality. If you do have any questions, don't hesitate to get back in touch. I didn't mention it, but we can offer you a free trial of the solution. So if you want to test out Yooz for 15 days, absolutely no obligation. It's a real-life test because we can create you an application with your own data. So it will be your chart of accounts, your list of suppliers, all your own data, so you can test that on Yooz. Thank you everyone for joining me. Look forward to speaking to you soon, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to get back in touch. Thanks for joining and have a very nice day. Bye-bye.